Good afternoon, Robertson Wesley. For those who are just joining for the first time, my name is Shylo. My pronouns are he and him, and I'm the Affirming Ministries Coordinator of Edmonton, and I'm based out of the Robertson Wesley Church. So every Monday I do Affirming Reflections, where I talk about a certain LGBTQ or faith or combined topics. And so today our topic that we're going to discuss and talk about is inclusive language. So many of you might be familiar with certain type of inclusive language, and may bring some inclusive language terms that I don't even know about. So I'd love to see kind of in the comments some terms that you personally use to be more inclusive. Before I continue on, I want to give a censor warning that later on in the live stream I will be referencing a few derogatory terms towards LGBTQ folks. So if that's something that is triggering for you, I will do a quick "this is the time" so you can mute or turn off and rejoin if that is not something that you would like to listen to. It'll also be very brief. So what is inclusive language? So we hear this term all the time: inclusion, inclusive language. We need to be inclusive. So what does that mean? What does it look like? And so inclusive language in general aims to avoid offense or fulfill the ideals of egalitarianism, and so avoiding expressions that imply sexism, racism, other biases, prejudice, degrading, derogatory, any of those terms that affect a certain particular group of people. And so use of inclusive language might be considered a form of political correctness, even though sometimes the term political correctness is mostly used to refer to the practice, which is considered a neutral description, but by some folks who are against inclusive language, they kind of use political correctness as a derogatory or negative connotation for this movement and for this change. So some of the criticisms behind the use of inclusion or inclusive language is that a lot of people feel they object the idea that they should be pressured into speaking and writing in a way that does not come naturally to them. It also criticizes the proposed changes as a form of social enforced censorship that unnecessarily constrains the freedom of speech and the freedom of expression. Many people do not enjoy being criticized for using offensive language when there was no offense meant or intended. And they do not advocate the ideas which inclusionists say are implicit in their language. So sometimes people use inclusive language because it is socially acceptable, despite actually holding a discriminatory view, either openly or secretly. So advocates hope that asking people to use inclusive language, even if they don't explicitly discriminate, encourages people to consider the concerns of the group in question more seriously than they may have otherwise. So this may reduce the effects of unconscious biases that we've seen in a lot of research and reports on implicit association tests. So an example of that would be there was a study done where individuals would send resumes to the same company. They would have the exact same resume for these two individuals, but the only thing that they changed was the name. The first name was a very white-sounding name. I think it was like Mark or John or something like that, whereas the other name was had I'm pretty sure it was themes from Lebanon, and so it was more of an Arabic name. And so all of the things, all of the schooling, all of the education, all of the work experience was exactly the same. The only difference was the name. And they found that more than 50% of the time, the white-sounding name would get a callback, and the folks that didn't have a white-sounding name would never get an interview. So these are kind of the things that are coming out of this language and these unconscious biases that some of the advocates for inclusive language want to erase or diminish. So, due to the effects of euphemism treadmills, LGBTQ, 2IA plus, these kind of euphemisms or other ways of uh, using acronyms and certain things that are just gotten to the point where even the names of these organizations or these groups are even changing from the name that they had when they evolved. Um, so many people think that this is a bad thing. They think language is too intense. They think it's changing too fast. But I think that's the best part about all of this, is that language is always changing and evolving. And that is one thing that we need to remember and to consider, that language changes all the time. The dictionary adds thousands of words every single year that have nothing to do with the LGBTQ community or any other oppressed group, but rather just basic words that we as a society have created and started using. And so language is always being changed. Language is always evolving. And so to say that we can't change language, I think, is a really more of a controlling way, instead of letting us express ourselves in more ways than what we used to. So there are many, many, many types of inclusive language. There's many different types of intersections that this can apply to. So there's certain things like gender neutral language that is inclusive. There's sexist language. There's racist and colonistic language. There's things like negative stereotypes that are used, sex positivity or body shaming, or just right out stigmas that are used in our society, are all ways that we use language to either be oppressing or liberating. So for today and for this live stream, I kind of wanted to focus a little bit more on the gender neutral language, or gender in general. So any language that has to deal with gender, we often use the term gender neutral language, just because that is an all-encompassing term, because it implies to avoid language that is sexist, heteronormative, cisnormative, and binary genderist, or genderism. So gender neutral language, or gender inclusive language, is a language that avoids biases towards a particular sex or social gender. In English, this includes the use of pronouns that are not gender specific, or even to refer to roles, professions, as well as avoiding pronouns such as just he, him, and his when referring to people that we do not know their gender or pronoun use. So I have a large list here of some of the avoiding or replacement languages. I can actually post this in the chat box. Let me do that so that you can all see it as well. Let me just copy it. So there's a bunch of different languages. This is not a complete list. This list can go on probably forever if you allowed yourself to. There we go. Oh, that's a really long list. I hope that makes sense. If not, I can post a inclusive language poster on the Affirming website, or on the Affirming Ministries Facebook page. Let's see. So some of our avoiding and replacement language, we can go from the top to the bottom. The most common one, which I think was one of the first ways that we tried to be inclusive, is the term humankind over our most common term mankind. So we used the term mankind for ever. I mean, the Bible uses the term all of mankind. And so we've really shifted to start using humankind, just because, I mean, mankind does not include people who are women or female identified. And so mankind is a very isolating and restrictive word. And so if we use humankind, then it opens up the possibility that there are more than just men on Earth, which I think those who are not men would appreciate. There's some even common things such as professions. So instead of saying a steward or a stewardess, we could say things like flight attendant. That's a very gender neutral term. fireman, firewoman, or policeman, policewoman. We can definitely just go back to the original terms that are gender neutral, such as just firefighter or police officer. Using the term, like the actual job profession term is usually always gender neutral. It's until we start using, adding men and women or female and male onto these things that they become gendered when they weren't before. Maybe sometimes it's the use of the term guys to refer to a group that often includes women. Instead of saying like you guys or hey guys, you can say you all or hello folks. Some other things could be a use of terms such as we are all manned or we have a lot of manpower. You can say that we have a lot of staff or we're staffed correctly or we are crewed, we're good to go. We can even change our assumption of using he or she based on the occupation or spouse's gender. So instead of using that, we can just use the singular they. Another derogatory term is using the term girl, but for adult women. So instead you can say young woman or just woman. Sometimes honorifics can be extremely oppressive, and so not so much for the masculine honorific, because Mr. is used for anyone who identifies as male. Now we have the MX honorific. But for women, there are three. Three honorifics that they can use, and so it's Miss, Mrs., and Ms. And so the honorific changes based on her marital status, and so that is very very old school in the whole idea that women change based off of their marriage identity, and that often is not the case anymore. And so using just the MS dot is seen as better than using the Mrs. with the R that informs that they're married, or the Ms., which means that they're young. So just dropping it entirely is probably the best way to go, but if needed, MS dot is the more common. Other things could be such as housewife. You can use homemaker. And this is where I'm going to talk a little bit about derogatory language. So if this is triggering to you, please mute out for 30 seconds. So derogatory language can be used as well. So things such as, faggots or fag, even terms such as tranny, things such as maybe dyke as well. Queer at one point was this, and still sometimes is used as this. Or ladyboy, or he, she, or it. These are all languages that may be used to identify individuals. Although there is the case that some individuals may self-identify with these terms, but if someone is using these terms to identify others without their implicit consent to that language, it is best to just use a language that individuals prefer or refer to as, instead of using derogatory language like I just mentioned. I hope those of you who turned out are back now. Some other things that may not have been as common is even just within the AIDS crisis, using terms such as being clean is a very derogatory way of not being inclusive, and instead saying HIV negative is a better way to understand that, because when we start using the term clean, it's implying that people who have HIV are dirty, and that's not the case. It is a part of life, and you either have it or you don't, and just because you have it doesn't mean that you're dirty or you can obviously spread it. There are many medications now and safe sex practices that are happening, and there's a lot more talk and acceptance of it, and so using the term clean is just a way of stigmatizing those who have HIV. Probably the most common part that you are probably familiar with inclusive language is the use of pronouns. Pronouns, as I stated at the beginning, my pronouns are he and him. They are a very important part of our own identities, regardless if you're trans or cisgender. So using, he or she based on appearance or name is sometimes not correct. Sometimes you're correct. Sometimes if you assume, you might get the answer right. But for the off times that you could be wrong, it is often better to ask people what their pronouns are, or the pronouns they prefer. Or you can even do it subtly by introducing yourself with your own pronouns. So like I'd said, my name is Shylo and my pronouns are he and him. And you are. And most times people will respond with the same thing. They'll respond with their name and their pronouns if you normalize that at the beginning of the conversation. For those who are churchgoers, another thing that we can talk about is language that we refer to God as. God has always been seen as a man or masculine or father. Even Jesus is known as a he and lived as male and is called the son. Some other ways that we can change this is, using gender-neutral language such as, lordship or just God. Or you can even say like the Holy Trinity or Trinity. Or spirits. There's many gender-neutral language that we can use for God, but at the same time, you can use all languages for God. And I think that's the best part about this, is that you can be you can use inclusive language for God, but you can also use any language for God. And so it's whatever you wish to, but to be aware that others may use different language to talk to and or reference God. So for me, I still struggle with calling God he, him, or father, but I do try to use a lot of pronouns when I talk to God, or when I'm preaching or having some sort of conversation with folks. I will sometimes use just all pronouns for God. So I'll say God he, and then God they, and then God she, or call God mother, father, guardian. There's multitude of different languages that we can use to refer to God. And I think it's okay for you to explore what fits with you and how you see your relationship with God. The more common language that we talk about is, things such as like men and women, or ladies and gentlemen. Some other ways that we can be more inclusive is just saying everyone, or hello friends, or folks, or another one was, what was it? They's and gentle thems is one that I've heard. Another one is, brother and sister. This is a very common one that we can easily change and just say sibling or siblings. Or girls and boys, we can change it to be kids or children. Wife and husband, we can often just say spouse or partner or lifelong friend. There's many different ways that we can be more inclusive with that language. So throw in the comments if there's any other languages that you did not hear me talk about, or that you personally use in your life, that you found useful and helpful. I know one of the things that I have noticed over the years is the increased use of the term nibblings. This is to help refer to nieces and nephews that often we don't have a gender neutral term for that. Whereas, like mom and dad, we have parent or guardian. Whereas for nieces and nephews, there never really was or is a gender neutral term for them, except for now we've started to see a lot of people using the term siblings, but changing the N and making it nibblings. And I think it's a cute word, and I use it a lot for my nieces and nephews as well. I use nibblings for them whenever I get the chance. So yeah, throw in the chat other terms that you may be familiar with, that you feel like others can definitely learn from. I'd love to see some of your ideas that you're using. But to slowly progress to the end of this live stream, many of you are probably wondering, why does this matter? Oh, Pan, it just came in and said nibblings. Yes, it's such a great term, isn't it? It's amazing. Yeah, Pan, I'd love to see some of the gender-neutral languages that you've used, or you're familiar with. Nibblings is one of them that I've been more familiar with, or pibbling. What is that one for? Oh, parent sibling. Oh, for aunts and uncles. That's great. Yeah, because that's another one that doesn't have a official gender-neutral term, and so that's great, pibbling. That's a great one, thank you. So many of you are probably asking, why does all of this even matter? You know, we're trying our best to be inclusive, so if I get a language wrong, why does this matter? And the reason why I'm so excited about talking about this, and I advocate so much for inclusive language, is because one of the sociological theories that I personally enjoyed studying and researching in school is the theory of symbolic interactionism. And so many of you probably have heard me talk about this before. I know I talk about it a lot in my privilege workshops. But symbolic interactionism is a sociological theory that develops from practical considerations and alludes to people's particular utilization of dialect or language to make images or normal implications for deduction and correspondence with others. So this very intense definition. So we can break it down a little bit. Brittany says, I've heard anticle for aunt, uncle, gender neutrality. That's great. Anticle. I love that one. Pan says, a hybrid word, so like anticle or unky. Unky, that sounds like a monkey. I love that one. And that's the best part about language. I know, Pan, you missed the beginning part, but I talk about how, you know, language is always evolving. You know, we've always added words to the dictionary, and so this is something that we as a society can start creating these new terms and moving towards a more gender-neutral language than in the past. So to kind of define or show a little bit more about what symbolic interactionism is, because I know that definition probably wasn't as helpful as I would have hoped. But I do explain it a little bit better by saying the interpretation process that occurs between interactions between people helps create and recreate meaning. And so it is the shared understanding and interpretations of meaning that affect the interaction between individuals. So individuals act on the premise of a shared understanding of meaning within their social context. Thus, interaction and behavior are framed through this shared meaning that objects and concepts have attached to them. From this view, people live in both a natural and a symbolic environment. And so to sum it up in the easiest way I can, essentially symbolic interactionism states that we as humans, we will see a dialect or a language or a word or a symbol, and based on our own experiences in the world, our own biases, our own understandings of words and symbols, we will see something and we will create meaning for it. And that meaning is very personal, and that's within us. That's our own meaning. And so you can have two different people look at the same symbols and have two completely different meanings. But the part about symbolic interactionism is that it's never a one-sided thing. So once you come into a new interaction with people, you are placing your meaning on things that they are then understanding and learning from you. And so there's three premises to this that'll help explain. It states that, one, humans act towards things on the basis of the meaning they have ascribed to those things. So for example, if you have, you know, the term, you know, I'm trying to think, like humankind, right? So if we removed humankind and we always had mankind. For those who are women or who are female identified, would look at that term and say, you know what, like, I don't feel included. I don't feel necessarily represented or seen or valued because the term that represents all of us doesn't include me. And so these meanings that we pull from that affect how we act towards things. And so the second premise is that the meaning of such things is derived from or arises out of the social interaction that one has with others and in society. And so if we constantly always as a society use the term mankind, then everyone in that society will ascribe to that meaning and know and understand it to mean mankind as the top goal, and that people who are not men aren't fully at the top. And the third premise is that the meanings are handled in and modified through an interpretive process used by the person in dealing with these things that they encounter. And so symbolic interactionism is a way of understanding our world and realizing that words and language are not fluffy. A lot of people like to, talk about how, the snowflakes. Snowflakes is a huge term that is used on the internet. Political correctness, being offended, all of these terms, identity politics, these are starting to surface a little bit more due to the push for inclusive language. And I think the best part about inclusive language is that it changes the meanings that we have. And so when we change our language and we start doing a lot of things that are gender neutral, that's going to change our entire understanding of how we see gender. So right now we live in a gender binary world, and that's how that's how I, as a trans folk, had grown up. I grew up thinking that I had to be female because that's what my society told me, and that's the meanings I put on myself due to my interactions with my parents, with my friends, with school, with work. But now that I have involved myself in more gender-neutral language, gender-neutral groups, trans groups, Robertson Wesley, who's using gender-neutral terms and inviting folks to come, that's when, that meaning changes and I have less stigma on myself, or less internalized, homophobia, or internalized transphobia, or internalized ableism. There's so many reasons why inclusive language helps. And it might not help directly, and it might still be fluffy, based on the fact that you can only talk to so many people in your lifetime. But if we all decide to change and use this new language, it'll affect an entire generation. And Pan, I'm glad that some of your classes have been speaking a little bit on this. So I'd like to hear a little bit of what you're learning and what you think. So in conclusion, inclusive language is not meant to be censoring or restricting in speech. Everyone does have a right to speak their own mind, but there are consequences to what you say. And so if society is starting to move towards inclusive language, if you don't want to use inclusive language, then that's on you, and you're going to have to reap the consequences of that. The goal is to change and modify our language so that the meaning and symbols we attach to those words change. We've already seen that a lot with the term queer. The term queer was a huge derogatory term that no one liked. And now it's probably the most inclusive term we have. And so words change because the meaning we attach to them change. And that only happens if all of us who are interacting make that change. So once our meanings change, the way we interact with others in society will shift greatly. And it'll reduce the amount of stigma, it'll reduce the amount of prejudice and hatred in our society. And usually education and just listening to one another are the best ways of showing and showing and making our world a better place. And so that's all I have today on inclusive language. I might do a second one of this, but not talk about gender neutrality, but maybe other languages that we use in our society, such as ableistic language and other languages that we see. Over here we have Pan mentioned. So much gender and of course inclusivity, my very diverse and healthy queer student body highlight and conversations regarding words and usage. You'd love it here. Oh, I probably would. Oh, you're living my dream. That's amazing. Yeah, no, it's amazing how much words really matter. It doesn't seem like it on the surface level, but language and terms and symbols and meaning have such a huge impact on us as humans, because that's how we learn, how we talk, how we socialize, essentially. Hence why it's considered a sociological theory. It's a way of how we socialize with each other, and I think if we want to create a more inclusive society, this is the best way to go, at least for the start. Because on the grand scheme of things, I know folks hate inclusive language because it seems to be more of a controlling, censoring type language. But I think at the end of the day, you have to weigh the pros and cons. You know, you have to weigh, is me being able to say a derogatory term more important than having someone who that word is used against live a healthy life? And for me, I think everyone deserves and needs a healthy life. And so my comfortability of using a term or one word definitely is over-trumped by the inclusivity and health of those around me. And so that's why I will always still advocate for inclusive language, even if I'm called a snowflake. So thank you all for joining. Hello to those who might be watching this later. Every Monday I'm here at noon. I don't know if next week I'll be here. Is that Thanksgiving? When is Thanksgiving? Oh no, next week I'll be here. The week after I'll be gone. So I'm here every Monday at noon, so come join me. If you want to talk a little bit more one-on-one or in a small group, I do have my Affirming Coffee Hour on Thursdays that start at 11 a.m., goes till noon. You'll just need to send me an email or a message on Facebook, and I can directly send you a Zoom link, or you can even email the office and talk to Elise about getting that link as well. So please feel free to join us. LGBTQ folks and allies are welcome. Anyone's welcome. It's just a place to kind of ask questions in a safe, confidential area and just to kind of hang out and chat. Pan says, fascinating that people think inclusivity is debilitating. Yeah, it's probably the most common response that we get from more conservative groups. They always say that it's very censoring, or one of the things I said earlier, Pan, some of the criticisms that we see, where is it? Essentially, people don't like to be called out on their inclusive language because they actually probably want to use it. And so they want to actually use this derogatory language, but they just feel like they can't now, which I think is a good thing, because you shouldn't be saying that kind of stuff, but people just feel like that's an infringement on their freedom of speech to be hateful, which I don't think is right, but everyone has their own opinion. And yes, the 12th is Thanksgiving, so we got one more week until Thanksgiving holidays. And yeah, come join us for coffee hour. I'd love to see a little bit more folks. And if you yourself don't want to join, but you know someone that might be interested, feel free to still message me and you can pass on the Zoom link yourself. And yeah, I'll see you all Thursday who joins. And if not, I'll see you next Monday, everyone. Take care. Have a great day.